I'm looking at down in there, there's looks like there's some kind of a ring that looks like it's holding that spring in. I thought the only thing that held that ring in was the fitting that I just took out. Just don't know if that's just corroded in there. Let's see. Yep. Just broke free. That's all corrosion. If I clean that out enough, I think it'll come out. There we go. All right. So believe it or not, that right there is an O-ring. All right. So there are actually 5 separate components to this assembly. There's the body right here, which has its own part number. Then there's this rod. There's this O-ring. Okay. There's this spring and this little cup that the spring sits in. Now, this spring is really badly rusted, and it's actually rusted into the cup. And the O-ring is rock hard. So, I'm also noticing there's quite a bit of rust on the end here on this pin. This part of the pin actually looks pretty good, though. I don't know, I might be able to save this pin. And I think if I clean out the inside of this body, I could save the body. But I'm definitely going to need a new O-ring, a new spring, and more than likely a new cup, or at the very least the spring and the O-ring. So I happen to be going into the city for business tomorrow, so maybe if I get a chance at lunchtime I'll be able to run over to the marina and see if he's got anything. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Save that. I'm not going to buy a new one of these. So now my only problem is going to be maybe well, definitely I'm going to need a new spring, an O-ring, and maybe this cup. Just was able to get that spring out of this little retaining cup. Okay, under close magnification, that cup looks serviceable. I just cleaned it out, scraped it out with the pointer here. So now I just need the O-ring and the spring. Well, I was just looking through my drawer of springs here, and well, believe it or not, I do not have any conical springs. At least I believe that's what that's called, conical. As in having a cone shape. Well, decided not to wait for that those parts to rebuild that fuel inlet. What I did was I've temporarily gone and mounted the coil here, just with this screw and the long bolt and nut in the back there. This one, I got the bolt in there, and I'm not going to tighten it all the way down because the actual body of that that fuel inlet piece that I've left out actually acts also as a spacer there. So, but this should be good enough just for testing purposes. I've got my high tension lead coming out of the coil, hooked back to the distributor. My plan at this point is I want to get the switch box and everything wired up to the distributor, because although I know my switch box is good and my ignition coil is good because I bench tested those, what I did was I substituted the trigger on the bench. So I was actually mimicking what the trigger on the distributor is supposed to do. So I don't know whether or not the trigger is any good in my distributor. So if I get this all wired up temporarily, I can do two things. I can check and make sure my trigger works, and the other thing I can do is I can actually get a look at the static timing of this thing. So because there's a trick. Basically what you end up doing is you end up looking at the spark plug and setting the flywheel to the position it's supposed to be in, and then manually rotating the distributor like this until it triggers. So, and I'll cover that more in detail when I get to that point. But for starters, I got to see whether or not this thing's even going to work at all. Because if this doesn't work, if the trigger is bad in my distributor, that's a whole nother world of hurt that I'm going to have there. Because I mean, that could be a project killer, because a replacement aftermarket distributor assembly for this thing is several $100s, and a good used one I think will run you about $200, and that's where I'm really out of my comfort zone, putting $200 more into this motor, which potentially could have something else wrong with it that I'm not even aware of. Right now I'm kind of into this thing for peanuts, you know, a few gasket kits, a few little carb pieces here and there, some fuel line, the fuel pump kits, a used starter. Not too bad so far. Well, these parts here that I have to put in these isolation mounts for that top cover, I've only got 2 of the proper nuts for all of them. I don't know, there might be one underneath there, I don't know. But the proper nuts are fine thread and self-locking. And I just went and looked through my drawer, and I can't find like anything like these. So I'm gonna have to buy some more of these. But I figure in the meantime, I'll replace this broken one. Unlike these two where I could just reach underneath and get the nuts on the bottom side, this one it's on a special mount. Alright, so these mounts have a short stud side and a long stud side. So the short studs seem to face down on all of these. I guess makes sense. It makes it easier to line up the cover when you're putting it on, dropping it on the top. Okay, I did have one original one, or at least the original one I got. Original to me. And this one doesn't have the self-locking nut. But I think that's just probably somebody lost one of the correct nuts and stuck one on there. Now this one, the short stud was facing up on this one, but I think that's just somebody put it in backwards at some point, inadvertently. So I'm going to take the last of my self-locking nuts, which I believe are the correct type for this application, and use it over here. And so then I'm going to need 1, 2, 3 replacement nuts. I do have this one nut that's the correct thread, but it's not a self-locking one. I'm just going to stick that on there temporarily. And so there's supposed to be 2 bolts that go through this into here. It's a little weird how this doesn't seem to line up. I'm pretty sure I've never had this cover on, ever. So over on this side I rehooked up the trigger wires. It's pretty easy. The black wire on the top, the white wire or gray wire in the middle, and the brown wire on the bottom. And the only other thing that needs to be hooked up over here, if I was going to do a more permanent hookup right now, would be the tilt switch, which mounts here and has 2 wires that mount to it. I think 2 wires. Well, anyways, doesn't matter. I don't need that right now. That's more of a safety feature for on the water. Over on this side, with the 2 wires from the coil, the greenish blue wire goes up to the green top connector here, and the black wire from the coil pack actually gets grounded to the case via this screw right here, which I just dropped. Speaking of grounds, in order for this to work, I'm going to make sure all my grounds are intact. Otherwise I can't complete the circuit. So what I'm wondering about is the starter. This is my positive input for the starter right here. But the starter is mounted in these rubber cups, so it's actually isolated from these mounts. There is a bolt right here, which I believe is going to be for the ground, because it threads right into the case of this end cap. So I think I need a ground cable to run from here to, well, maybe here even, maybe just from here to here, or from here to here, or from here to here, or here to here, I don't know. I'm looking at my bag of tricks here. I'll have to look at my review of some of my earlier videos, but I don't see any. But again, this cover was off and the starter was missing when I got this motor. So I have no idea what was here. This wire right here is not it. I know this is for something else. This might be the choke wire. I don't remember. I'll have to refresh my memory as to what this little artifact of wire left behind is. Because this little nub of wire right here goes to the electric choke. I'm not worried about that right now either. Again, you know, right now, the job is to see whether or not the trigger works. Alright, so I'm about to conduct the test of the trigger in the distributor. So I've got my temporary wire. I've got white and red on the switch box tied together, and I've got my 12-volt power coming from my 12-volt power supply coming to well, white right now, but since they're tied together, I'm essentially sending 12 volts to white and red. I've got my ground lead from my power supply on the case here. Well, one of the things I want to do is I want to make sure that I've got a good ground continuous through the system here. So I'm just looking at, for instance, do I have a ground from, yeah, I have a ground from this casing to the ignition coil body to this frame, and also to the block, which is important because I've got a spark plug clamped to the block up here, and I've got the spark plug high tension lead for spark plug number 1 is the one that I'm using. Now, they say that you shouldn't have all of the other spark plug wires ungrounded when you're doing this test or messing with this box. But keep in mind that in this particular situation here, I'm actually only going to be rotating it so that it should be only firing the number 1 position. So I think that's going to be okay. Another note about testing it the way I'm about to test it. You never want to test it this way. You don't want to do what I'm about to do. The reason why I know it's safe for me to do what I'm about to do is because I know that there is absolutely no fuel present in this system. I've got cleaned carburetors that have been reassembled that have never seen fuel yet. I've got fuel pumps and fuel lines that have never seen any fuel. This thing is bone dry. There isn't any fuel residue or anything left behind in anything. the reason why I say that is because if there was fuel in the bowls of these carburetors and I wire this all up and then I go and I start turning this crankshaft like I'm gonna do, okay, what could potentially happen is one of the cylinders could fire and violently spin this this crankshaft. So that's why you don't want to do it that way. As a matter of fact, the method I saw described on several forums was to actually set the crankshaft to the position you want it set at and actually rotate the distributor back and forth like this to actually mimic the firing. In other words, recreate the situation of the thing actually going past the point where it fires, the trigger point, by doing this. So theoretically, if I put this at top dead center on the flywheel and I do this, it should fire, and there should be a point where it fires, which, if everything's set correctly, it will be actually firing at right when it comes up against one of these bumpers, depending on whether or not I'm checking the wide open throttle advance or the idle. Alright, so here's my spark plug. I've got this clamp holding it so it's grounded. So I should be able to see a spark there when I trigger this thing. So I put my power supply on. And I'm actually at the position that corresponds to before top dead center. So I should be able to crank this over and hit a point where it actually, oops, did it just fire? Thought I just heard something. Right there, there it is. So let me show you that again. Right there. So my trigger is good. That is great news.